Okay, guys, we're going to just dive right in. Last time we talked about adjusting the click track to match the live drums. Now we're going to talk about Elasticato, where I'm going to lock a drum to the click, essentially the grid. First, before you are going to do Elasticato, obviously take a moment and try and do a good comp. I'm not going to show you in this video how to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and assume that you have a pretty good drum take and you just need to adjust a few things to make it 100 times better, or just to address different problem areas. You want to go to right next to this bell marker and go to rhythmic mode. It'll take a little bit of processing time, but it shouldn't take too long. Now the problem area is right in here. In case you didn't listen to the last take, it goes from 5/4 to 4/4, and he's just rushing a little bit. Is all. Right here. So, anyways, I just wanted to say that this track was recorded guitars and click, and then the drums were done after. So I kind of want to keep the guitars as they are. I don't really want to re-record them. As with the other one, what you're going to want to do starting off is create an edit point in the warp mode. Create warp markers at the beginning and the end of tracks. On Windows, it's start click, and I believe on Mac it's control click to create these markers. It doesn't have to be on one of these lines here, the analysis markers. It just has to be at the beginning and end, so that the files don't do any crazy shifting as you're editing the beginning and end of them. So we're going to stick with this kick drum here. And the snares were fine. It's just the snare, this one after the fill. I want it to drop right on top of the two. So I'm going to start and edit there. And I know where this kick should be fine. I'm going to create these two warp markers essentially, so now any edits we do are going to be confined to there. And again, make sure that your drums are in a group mode, because you don't want to have to sit there and do inserting warp markers all of the time. You just want to do one and have all of the drums be phase congruent with each other, essentially. Because if you start shifting tracks separately from each other, it's a very wish-washy sound, especially if you have them in a stereo spectrum. It's very it takes you out of the mix, definitely. So I've got this locked to an 8th 16th note grid. What I'm going to do is just drag the snare over, and my grid marker is this little gray line right here, and when you're in analysis mode you can't quite see it, but I know that that's where I want the two. And so now that is basically locked in. I'm just going to increase this to 8th note. I can keep going across the whole song, really, if I wanted to. Some songs, if it's an electronic feel, you might want it to be locked right into a specific downbeat. Some songs you don't want to take the groove completely away. But let's see how that sounds. So that snare right there is way early. So what I can do is just shift that. You can essentially cheat it. You're just basically moving these snares to the nearest grid mark, which I would assume is a 2. You always listen to this after. I just do a quick pass, and I'm just moving these snares to the nearest. I'm moving the mouse left and right, and it's snapping to the nearest 8th note. So this is fine for the snares, but say the kick is hit early, then you can go right in closer and quantize them essentially closer. Like for example, this kick right here, visually I can see that it's hit a little bit earlier than the 4 in the bar. Let me just listen here. So that's even a 1 actually, sorry. So I can drop this. And there's some fills. If a guy is doing a 16th note fill and you want it to be like machine gun tight, feel free to go right in there and lock all of those in. I can even show you how to do that with these hits here. I'm switch this to a 16th note grid. So I can lock all of these quarters right into right on top of the groove here. Let me just make sure that that's right. Let's shift this back. See, maybe I pushed it back. So you can do that, you know, and you can get right in deep with those. Now, what I wouldn't suggest doing is dragging it so close that it has undesired artifacts. And by undesired artifacts, I mean like dragging these right close enough so they're red, or dragging like this. Now listen to the tech. It's very strange. You can really do anything with this. If you're looking to experiment, then by all means break the rules, but it doesn't exactly sound great when you do that. So I usually use it just for gentle push-pulls on ones, twos, that kind of thing. If a bar is, if a drummer's not quite at a time, but you just want to tighten them up a little bit, this is a great tool to do that, to just lock in one beat per measure, you know, and it's going to really tighten everything else out. Now, there was one mode, which you just saw there. If you hold shift and insert a marker, what that's going to do is it's going to create a warp marker on either side of the current edit point. So I'll just show you over here somewhere that you haven't seen before. If I hold shift and create one, see how it creates where I was clicking. It creates the region where, a warp marker where I was clicking, and then on either side of it. The problem with, I just really suggest not doing this on drums, because the problem is now that these other warp markers have been created, they've been created on different locations based on their own tracks analysis points. And if that sounds complicated, essentially this track here is fading over this much time, and this track is fading over this much time. So everything is going to be slightly out. You can do this mode if you're doing single tracks. Like bass, for example, is a good way to create. It's a fast way of just creating edit points. But on drums, because you're dealing with multiple tracks that need to be phase coherent all of the time, I really wouldn't do that. I would just edit right through and pick an instrument that has a high transient attack, like a kick or a snare. I wouldn't use overheads. I wouldn't use rooms, because they're typically delayed, 10 milliseconds or more. So it's not exactly accurate. This is how I usually just tighten up a drum track. And as you saw, I can tighten up a drum fill if I need, just by going right into the grid and doing that. If you're doing extreme stretching, that's when it's going to sound bad. If you're doing light stuff, like this drummer is pretty close, I'm just doing here and there shifting, it works great. And I've done it on many tracks and people have not known the difference. I certainly do sometimes hear the artifacts, as they call them, but honestly, the amount of time just doing 4 or 5 mouse clicks saves than retracking drums is definitely worth any small artifact. Obviously, people are going to argue with me on that point, but if you're being paid per edit, then I could see why. But it's much faster, and it's going to get you the product back in the artist's hands if you can just fix up a fill. Obviously, again, I just want to emphasize that you've already done the comp and you have their best take and you have the different sounds that you want. All you should use this for is just tightening stuff up here and there. Like that section wasn't bad on drums, it just wasn't right on the click. And because I recorded the guitar and drums before the guitar and bass before the drums, that's why it sounds off. So that's why I'm using it. Anyways, if you have any questions about time searching drums or whatever, just email me at stereoface@gmail.com. Okay, thanks.